My name is Wendy S, and I'm the author of A Monster Like Me. It's a middle grade novel coming out in March, and it's a story about Sophie, who has a blood tumor on her face, and she believes that she was cursed as a child, and it turned her into a monster. And she finds this great book of monsters, and she was able to identify with it, and she believes that other people are monsters also, and it makes sense because they're bullies and they treat her badly. And she wants to get rid of the monster mark, but she's afraid that it goes too deep. And what she wants most of anything is just to be human. When I was little, I had a blood tumor on my forehead, and my mother tells me about a time when we were in the grocery store, and I was in the shopping cart, and there was another woman there with a bunch of teenagers, and she pointed at me and she said, "Hey, look, kids, that kid doesn't even need a Halloween costume. She's already got one." And they all started laughing, and the teenagers were laughing, and they walked out of the store, and my mom was so shocked that she couldn't even speak, and the register people also couldn't even talk. And so it was more traumatic for my mom than me because I was young at that time. But then I had other experiences later that where they said I had the mark of the devil on me and other things, and I thought, what would it be like for a girl who didn't have a support system, who believed the things they were saying about her? And so she actually internalized that and believed that she was a monster, and that's kind of what started the story. I used that same experience that I had in the grocery store with my mom with Sophie and her mom. So she experiences that same shock of someone else pointing out that, oh, you're a monster, and she internalizes it and goes on from there. So after that experience in the store, then Sophie's mom is obviously upset by the thing because she was there, and she asks Sophie, "Are you okay?" And Sophie mumbles, "I'm fine, I'm fine." But really she's not. Inside there's all this turmoil, and she's internalizing that it's just more validation that I actually am a monster, and she's not okay. She's hiding it. The most vocal bully of Sophie's is a kid named Taggart, and she immediately categorizes him as a goblin because he's just mean. He leads a pack of orcs. They're always bullying her. They bother her friend Autumn, and she's already decided that this is who he is. But then she has an experience later in the story where she starts to see more of his life, and she realizes that there's this front he has at school, and then there's this home life that she had no idea. No one at school has no idea, and that home life makes it so that she can understand the pain that he's hiding behind the meanness. It changes her perception of him, and that moment is based on an experience I had when I was younger, when one of the students that I knew at school took me to his house after school one day, and he took me down and he showed me the areas in the wall in the basement where his brother had pushed his head through the wall. And from then on, I started seeing that when he was having an off day at school, that usually it's because there was something at home, and none of us knew. He kept it secret, so he had monsters in his life, and we didn't know about them. Well, when I was little, and the bullies would get pretty big, and it was hard, then I would go and retreat into books, and I would read all kinds of books, and it was an escape for me. And Sophie feels rejected because of all the bullying, and so she also retreats into this world where the monsters are real. So she looks for places where she can feel like she does belong, and that is in places of myth and of legend and of monster stories, because that's where all of those stories come from, is people trying to make sense of their own reality. And so she uses that to be able to say, okay, this person's mean, therefore he must be this. This one's nice, he must be that. She can categorize her world because of the monsters. Part of the thing I think that makes it so Sophie and other kids can relate to monsters and other fantastical creatures is because they can see part of themselves in those. For instance, monsters are often hiding, and Sophie spends much of her time trying to hide from the world, and they are often alone, and she feels very, very alone, and they can be scary, and she feels like she is scary to other people. She's afraid a lot herself also. So she's afraid people will find out about her. She's afraid people will fear her because that's the experience she has with bullies. And sometimes monsters are kind of out of control, and she feels that same loss of control. Sometimes things happen and she can't control everything. And sometimes kids just can't control their world, just like monsters. Sophie's imagination is a wonderful thing, but it's also part of what helps her hide, and it isolates her a little bit further at first because she has this whole world she lives in and she hasn't let anyone else in. But her fascination with monsters is also the gateway that lets her go and let other people in, because when she shares it with her friends and then they get excited and say, oh, Sophie knows what you are, she knows what kind of a monster you are, and she can share that, then that's the first crack in her shield, and it's the first thing that lets her let someone into her world a little bit, and suddenly she's not so alone. For instance, Sophie's decided that her best friend, Autumn, who's bubbly and wonderful and light, she's obviously a fairy, and so the other kids want to know what kind of fantastical creature they are too. And so one might be a dryad, and another one might be a sprite, or might be some other kind of thing like that. So they're all excited to know, what are we? What kind of cool creature could we be? So in the beginning of the book, then Sophie comes to believe that the thing that's going to give her the power to change her world is this amulet that she creates, this magical item that's going to make it so she can be able to change from this monsterness to a human. But in reality, it's going to come from within. It's her self-acceptance that gives her the power to be able to make a difference in her own life and in the lives of the people she loves around her. Sophie is so lonely. She's very lonely and very isolated. She categorizes herself as a monster. She categorizes other people as other creatures, and so she dismisses them as fast as she dismisses herself, that this is what you are and you don't really have any hope of progression or anything. And she didn't really understand what it was to be human. But then she had a counselor that comes in and kind of gives her a key that this is what it is to be human. They talk about courage and justice and mercy and all of these things that come together to create compassion, and then she can progress to what it is to be human.